ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਸਿੱਖ ਚੈਨਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤ੍ਰਿੰਜਨ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਨਿੱਘਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਫੇਰ ਆਏ ਹੋਏ ਹਾਂ ਰੂਬੀ ਡਲ ਤੇ ਘਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ। You've invited us into your home. I feel so blessed to be here, honestly.
Thank you for being here.
Really, really humbled. ਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ last week Ruby ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ. We talked about your the whole refugee journey, your immigrant experience, where your love of books, where it was born from. And you were telling us how we talked about so many things last week. We talked about, highs and lows in life, and ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਸੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਚਿਹਰੇ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਇੰਨਾ ਨੂਰ ਆ ਜੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਪੁਰਾਣੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਵੀ ਦੱਸਦੇ ਹੋ like there's no regret or I don't know I can't describe it in words like there's no you don't feel like oh yes I had a really tough life you really talk about it as a beautiful wholesome experience and we were talking about how a person gets to that stage but let's rewind a bit because ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ you got some money from your dad ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ went to this bookstore that you'd discovered at Western International Market. ਫਿਰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੋਂ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਲਈਆਂ. How old are you at this point roughly?
I was around 8 years old.
8 years old. Yeah. So you were reading quite fluently because at that age.
Yeah.
So what kind of books and were you reading? What were the authors?
Yeah.
Who were your favourite authors?
It was mostly Caucasian, white authors. There was Jacqueline Wilson, there was Kathy Cassidy, there was Karen McCombie. Mostly actually everyone that I've read was a white author who wrote children's books. So the stories I was reading was specifically stories of Caucasian children going about their lives in a way that was very different to mine. So for me, books at that point were a form of escapism. They were a way through which I could escape, whatever I was going through in the real world and just go into the stories and read about all these people going through these different experiences to mine, and that's the thing that I really loved about the books. But as I got older, I guess I was 8, 9, 10, and I realized that there were no books about girls that looked like me.
So ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ 8 ਸਾਲ ਦੀ ਉਮਰ 'ਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਪੜ੍ਹਨੀਆਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ but they're all ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ authors. ਕੋਈ ਸਾਡੇ and so obviously ਜਦੋਂ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ ਲਿਖਣਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਐਕਸਪੀਰੀਅੰਸ ਬਾਰੇ ਲਿਖਣਾ so it was a form of use the word escapism. So ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ ਕਿਸਮ ਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੂਸਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ.
Yes.
You were going into ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ you were entering their world ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਚਲੋ ਇਹ ਤੇ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਪਿਆਰ ਪੈ ਗਿਆ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਪੜ੍ਹਨ ਦਾ ਆਪਣੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਤੋਂ ਦੂਰ ਦੂਸਰੀ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ it's like you're getting lost in this book ਪਰ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਲਿਖਣ ਦਾ ਸ਼ੌਂਕ ਕਿੱਥੋਂ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਫਿਰ?
So books were truly a way through which I could just entertain myself, and this became very apparent to the people around me. So as Diwali came, birthdays came, the stack of books in my room grew, it increased, and I would read, my brother gave me a little flashlight, and at night under the covers after it's bedtime I'd read the books and I'd read as much as I could. And the more that I read, the more passionate I became about wanting to write something, and so I found myself writing alternative ending chapters to books that I read. So say it was a book by Karen McCombie, who used to write this particular series in my time called Ali's World, and it was about this very big dysfunctional family of this Caucasian girl who's got a dog, and she's got 2 dogs and 3 brothers and 6, and it's like a proper big family. And so that I could relate to. That I was like, oh yeah, you know what? She's got a big dysfunctional family, which sounds like such a normal South Asian family situation. And so I would write alternative chapter endings to those books. And then the more that I read the books, I realized, why is there no story about a Kiran or a Simran or a Harpreet or anyone who is a brown person having a brown experience from the West? Because I understood that yes, there is, there's Asia, there's East Asia, we've got India, we've got those Indian authors writing books for their particular market and the kids that are growing up there, which reflects their experiences. But where are the authors who are first generation immigrants, 1.5 generation immigrants, who are now, who have had these experiences that I'm having as a 1.5 gen immigrant? and they've written these books that I can relate to. There was no one. There was not a single South Asian author that when I went to I made my first trip to Waterstones when I was in primary school, there was not a single book by a Western South Asian author. And I'm now 29, this is 20 years ago, and I couldn't find a single brown author.
So ਅੱਜ ਤੋਂ 20 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ, what you're saying is, just for the Punjabi listeners as well, ਕਿ in this country ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ ਲੇਖਕ ਸੀਗੇ ਜੋ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ obviously ਲਿਖਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਅੰਗਰੇਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ, and we've got India like you say, ਤੇ ਇਸ ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਾਂ ਬੋਲੀ ਵਾਲੇ ਵੀ ਲੇਖਕ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਉਹ ਉੱਥੇ ਦੀ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਸੀ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਬਾਹਰ ਦੇ ਜੰਮਪਲ ਨੇ, so we're still Indian, you know, we still have got our roots, we still look the way we look, ਪਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਜੰਮੇ ਪਲੇ ਆ। our experiences of growing up ਇਸ ਦੇਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਉਹ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਕੁਝ ਮਿਸਿੰਗ ਸੀਗਾ, ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਲੱਭ ਰਿਹਾ, ਕਿ ਮੇਰੇ ਵਰਗਾ ਕਿਸੇ ਕਿਤਾਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੁਝ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ। ਸੋ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਪਿਆਰ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਲਿਖਣ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤਾ ਲਿਖਣਾ ਫਿਰ?
Because ਮੈਂ relatable stories ਲਿਖਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੀ ਸੀ for future kids, for people who want to read books but can't find something that they can relate to. क्योंकि मेरे वास्ते books escapism सी, लेकिन हर एक बंदे वास्ते नहीं होता. Some people read because they want to find out about their history. Some people read because the person on the cover looks like them. There was when growing up, now I see so many, thank God, South Asian authors, Sikh authors who write children's stories about little kids with boys with top knots. There's so many now.
Now there is. ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ, I wouldn't say ਬਹੁਤ ਪਰ before ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਨਾਲੋਂ, even when I was growing up, which was even before you, ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਤੇ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ I think even not just books but TV ਤੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, even models ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਹੁਣ ਮੇਰੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਸਕੂਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ। I remember ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਭੈਣ ਭਰਾ ਸਕੂਲ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਮੇਬੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਕੂਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੂੜੇ ਵਾਲੇ ਮੁੰਡੇ, ਦਸਤਾਰ ਵਾਲੇ, there was just a handful. ਹੁਣ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਬੇਟਾ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਤਕਰੀਬਨ 50% if not more. So they see people like them all the time. But when you were growing up, this was not the case for you.
In primary school it definitely wasn't the case, and then in high school I went to an all-girls school. So yes, there were predominantly people of color because I went to a state school. So utte sare hi immigrant people of color de bacche jande si, because it was a working class area that I studied in, not a private school or anything of that, or a grammar school. It was a state school. A lot of kids were people of color, but I feel like because of my love for books and how much I enjoyed reading, that misrepresentation really got to me, because it's like even in today's day and age, hanji books hagi, lekin the representation of it doesn't represent the amount of readers we have that are South Asian, that are Sikh, that are Punjabi, that are so on. Because you go into a bookstore, even today you will find 90% of the books are written by Caucasian white authors, specifically men. You will not find as many books written by people of color, specifically written by the South Asian community. You're not going to find that. You'll see it online, but you're not going to see it in a bookstore. And it's even harder to get representation when you write a story. Like right now I want to write a novel about, like a romance novel, about two South Asian, Punjabi, Sikh, Afghani people falling in love at university. When I even think about telling my agent or telling an editor that this is the story I want to write, I already get filled with so much apprehension and so much fear, because I'm like, what if they turn around and they say to me, kaun padega? Who's going to read this? This is not going to be relatable to 90% of our audience. And it's like, no, it's going to be relatable to 90% of your audience. It's not going to be relatable to the 10% Caucasian white readers. And that's the 10% that the majority of the books represent.
Are written for,
It's crazy, honestly.
So you mentioned, I remember in the first episode, that when you started reading and you would write alternative endings. Tell us about that.
I mean, I no longer have that little, I had a little pink notebook. And I'd write alternative endings. So I would do the whole dialogue. I would do everything. So the characters, everything has already been developed by the author whose book I'm reading. And I'm just writing an alternative ending to what's going to happen according to my creative, creativity at the time when I'm like maybe 10. And I used to write And then I started writing short stories, and I didn't start poetry until I was 21 though, so I didn't move on to poetry until much
Did you
later.
do well at school in English?
Yes,
You
I did.
yeah.
I even studied it for A-levels as well. I just didn't, okay, so I didn't pursue English in university specifically because I knew that the literature that I'm going to learn in university is going to be nothing that I want to know about. It's all going to be Shakespeare or, the Elizabethan times of literature, Victorian times literature, stuff that is mostly for Caucasian people who want to learn, because it's very specific. Like when you go to university, what you learn is what your professor is researching into. And if you study in the West, most literature, like 99% of the literature, is literature made for the West. You're not going to read a book by an Indian author. You're not going to, you're not going to research a book or actually go into and study a book by someone who's not a white author or something that is seen as great literature in the West. And great literature in the West is not what I can relate to essentially.
Talking of that, were you ever exposed to any other authors, I don't know, any even historical poetry of any in other languages? Were you exposed to that at all?
Not in other languages at all, but the one experience that changed my life forever, which made me, because up until that point, the dream of being an author was just it was like an idealistic dream. It was मैं करना चाहनी हूं लेकिन मैनू लगदा नहीं कि
it didn't seem like a possibility.
It didn't seem realistic.
But you're still very young at this age when this dream
I'm very young.
takes seed.
Yeah, and then the first time I truly felt that I can realize this dream was I was 16 and I was studying English literature in my A-levels, and I read, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called The Kite Runner.
Yes,
and it's
I've
by
read that.
Khalid Hosseini.
Yes.
And that was the first time
that book made me cry.
Yeah. And the experience that he talks about in terms of the Afghani experience, I have learned all of that from my family, like from my parents.
And it was the first time you found it in a book.
It's the first time I found that experience in a book, the first time that I felt like someone's written a story about a culture that I can relate to, that I can actually...
So, all book... ਪੜਨ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ The Kite Runner ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਿਆ ਕਿ ਹਾਂ ਮੈਂ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਹਾਂ. It became a possibility.
It became a possibility.
And I think there was one more at that time.
Oh my God.
The Breadwinner.
Okay, I've not heard about the Breadwinner, but Khalid Hosseini wrote another one which touched me even more, and it was called A Thousand Splendid Suns.
Yes.
And that was about two women.
Yes.
And for me, that completely blew me away. When I read that, and I was like, okay, so this is a specific author, a Muslim Afghani author who's writing about such a niche topic, so specific to his culture, to his traditions, and he has made, he's created a hurricane in the world of literature. And I was like, if he can do it, I was like, I can do it too. My experiences are valid. The story I want to tell is valid. The people that I want to write about should be written about, essentially.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the seed was planted way before that, but this just almost made it bloom, that you thought, yes, this is what I'm going to do.
This is what I'm going to do.
So then you start writing these alternative endings to stories.
Yeah.
You read The Kite Runner and A Thousand Splendid Suns, but you're still very much keeping it to yourself.
Yeah.
ਹਨਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੁਨੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣੇ even ਆਪਣੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲਿਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ is it all just very personal to Ruby?
ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਮੈਨੂੰ books ਨਾਲ ਪਿਆਰ ਹੈ
ਹੈਗਾ,
but they don't know that I want to be an author. So I went to I did my A-levels like a studious student, went to university, studied philosophy, which was, for me, it was like, if I can't study English literature because of the fact that I don't those specific works of literature I don't want to study, then what's going to help me tweak and perfect my art of writing and open my mind up without me straying too much away from creativity? And that was philosophy, because philosophy is such an expansive subject. It's so eye-opening and mind-opening, and it was amazing. So while I studied philosophy, whenever we'd break up for summer holidays or Christmas, I would spend that time working on the first draft of my novel. So I was working on a novel at 18.
That's not been published though. Your novel.
No,
Yeah,
it's hidden away in a folder that will never be opened. It will never be opened because it was so bad.
Never say never.
It was so bad. When I look back now, I'm like, it was so bad. But obviously at the time, I felt like I was creating art.
Yeah.
And, oh my God, I've got all these dialogues and I've got all this like stuff happening. But I've never taken a single creative writing class. I've never sat down and really thought about what plot, structure, all of that means. Like, I've just not done any of that. I've just said, okay, I love reading, let me write a novel. So I spent the first 3 years every summer working on that novel. But
this is while you're at uni?
This is while I'm at university, yeah. So I study. This idea in my head of I need a practical career, a practical job is always, it's in my head.
क्योंकि ये चीज़ों से सोचते नहीं है कि am I going to earn from this? Can this be a career?
No.
So are you still looking at traditional type of roles where I can earn money? And
Yeah. At this time, I'm in my head. It's like, okay, so how do I, like, the way to happiness is to earn enough money to be able to provide, right, for myself. How do I do that? I need a stable career. Can books give me a stable career? No, there's no South Asian authors. Like, this is 10 years ago. No, I don't see any South Asian authors who are making it. I don't see any books by Western South Asian authors that I feel like give me even like the slightest bit of hope that I can make it. And I'm from such a specific minority group that any story I would write, why would anybody read it? My experiences are so particular to me. So then I said, okay, I was really inspired by the teachers in my school. I loved my philosophy teacher, my religious education teacher. And so I said, I want to be a teacher. Teaching is plan B, okay? In case the writing doesn't work out, which is plan A. So work on my novel on the summers, finish my philosophy degree, and then do a PGCE, which is a teacher training course after you graduate. And then in 2015, I graduate, and I say, okay, now I'm going to start my PGCE. Start my PGCE in September, and I'm like, okay, it's great. Like, teaching, you know, Monday to Friday, 9 to 3, I'll have so much time. I'll have so much time to write. Start my PGCE and I am thrown in and I'm like, oh my God, I am so tired. For the first month we do like uni work, but then the moment that I get moved into a classroom where I'm training to be a teacher, I quickly realize that I am not made for this because I have no passion for it. I don't have the skills for it. I don't have anything that because you know, we say a lot about the education system. Teachers are truly controlled by the system, but to be there for that long, despite being so impacted by the government and affected by what the state wants you to teach.
You have to have a love for teaching.
You have to have a love for teaching, for kids, for wanting to make a difference in their lives. And I did not have that passion. I really respect what teachers do, but for me, my passion was writing. So 3 months into that PGCE, I quickly decided, okay, you know what? I'm
not wasting any more time.
I'm not wasting any more time. And so 3 months in November 2015, I left my teacher training, my PGCE, and I went back to my part-time job, which was working at Next. And I decided that I'm going to start working on my manuscript, which was a fiction novel. So it was a story. It was a novel.
So this is the one that you were writing in the summers when you would come.
Yeah.
Tusi thoda jiha na I think there's just so much to talk about. But you talked a little bit about your philosophy teacher as well.
Yeah.
And then we stopped and then we started, you know, talking about wanting to go into teaching and things like that. Go back to that because I feel like there was something that you wanted to say.
So my philosophy teacher was amazing. I studied philosophy for A-levels. I remember her name.
But you did philosophy at uni as well.
Yeah. So philosophy at uni was really amazing. But you can't really build that connection or that relationship with your professors as you can in a classroom in high school, I would say personally. So my experience of studying philosophy at university was very interpersonal, where I learned so much, but it was all personal learning. I went to my lectures, my seminars, got so much information out of it, but I never managed to build that relationship with my professor. But my love for philosophy came about because of my teacher, because of how much she inspired me. She was an amazing teacher. Her name was Miss Young, I think, or Miss Jung, I can't remember, but she was incredible. Like, she was the kind of person who comes into a classroom, and she was a person of color, so she's a brown South Asian lady, and she would come into the class and instantly you would want to learn. Like, she would sit down and she'd have all these questions, these philosophical questions about the topics that we're learning. She'd sit down, she was friendly, she was like a friend to us, and just when you think about it, you're like, if I ever want to be a teacher, I want to be
like her.
Like her. That was my inspiration. I was like, and very soon when I started practicing and teaching teacher training, I realized that it takes a lot of work to get like her.
Yeah. So your plan B, so plan A Ruby ਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ novel ਲਿਖਾਂਗੀ, but obviously ਅਗਰ ਉਹ ਨਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਤਾਂ I'm going to do ਮੈਂ ਟੀਚਰ ਦੀ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ, ਪਰ ਟੀਚਰ ਦੀ ਟ੍ਰੇਨਿੰਗ ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੋ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਜਲਦੀ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਮੇਰੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, I can't do this, so ਤੁਸੀਂ part time ਫਿਰ ਕੰਮ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋ and then you go back to the manuscript.
Yes.
That manuscript still hasn't been published.
I know.
So how and so a question that I'm sure that our viewers want to know, but for me, do your family, your friends now know कि रूबी लिखदी है? क्योंकि up until this point ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਪਤਾ ਕਿ रूबी ਨੂੰ ਕਿਤਾਬਾਂ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ੌਕ ਹੈ, ਤਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਬਰਥਡੇ ਆਇਆ, ਕੋਈ ਜਨਮ ਕੁਛ ਆਇਆ ਤਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ रूबी ਨੂੰ ਇੱਕ get her the next book. But do they know that Ruby wants to write professionally, or is this dream a personal dream, or is it something you've shared with people?
Yeah. So there's a few things that we need to take into consideration. The first is, मेरी family, like, they come from Afghanistan, right? ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ time ਵਿੱਚ like ਲੜਕੀਆਂ ਕੰਮ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਦੀ ਸੀ, so you would get married very young, 15-16 ਸਾਲ ਦੀ ਉਮਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਵਿਆਹ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਸੀ, and to come from that, go to India and then come to the UK and you see ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਧੀਆਂ ਪੜ੍ਹ ਲਿਖ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਤੇ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧ ਰਹੀਆਂ, it's already quite a generation change and a gap for parents.
And it's not a gradual change.
It's not a gradual change.
Just all
it's
of a
an
sudden.
abrupt change. So growing up at that time, the particular family that I came from, education wasn't something that was really pushed down on us. It was never, like, my dad never said
it wasn't a priority.
My dad never said to me, you need to be a doctor, you need to be a lawyer, you need to...
It was just something that you had to
It was just something that I would see everyone in my class doing, that they're all working towards something, and I was like, okay, I need to work towards something either. But the general consensus was, okay, you're 20, 21, you're going to get married, you're going to, that was in their mind, what they thought that the trajectory is going to be. So now that you've gone to uni, you're going to get a job. Once you've got a job, you're going to get married. Like that was how it worked in my dad's head. But he never... pressured me to study something, and he never pressured me to live the life that he wanted me to live. So I always had that freedom, which I feel like not many young people do. I look at my husband, and in his head, my in-laws family, they have always been very passionate about studying from day one. My father-in-law actually studied, so he graduated from university. He's from Afghanistan. He studied. He went to Russia to study.
Wow.
He studied philosophy and economics.
Wow.
So my husband's family, they come from a family where
of
academics. They have studied, they have, they're educated, and so education was very important for them. But the place that my family comes from, my dad, he comes from a village. So it wasn't about studying as much as it was about just kind of getting through life. So at that particular point, when I said that I want to leave my PGCE, my dad never made a big deal out of it.
Yeah.
The person who I took advice from was my brother. And that's because I'm really, really close to my brother. So before I left the PGCE, I said to my brother, I want to be an author. I want to write books.
You said those words, I want to write books.
I told him. And he was like, okay. He was like, let's see where it takes you. He was like, leave. And I left. And I think the thing I'm grateful for is the fact that, being South Asian, I didn't have rent to pay. I didn't have the financial pressures that Caucasian white kids do have. When they're 18, they move out, they go to university, they might not be able to come back home because their parents are like, go get a job. Or even if they do come back home, they need to pay rent. I didn't have any of those pressures.
Yeah. You were able to write. Yeah.
I was able to write. My brother was 2 years older than me. So at this point, he's in his early 20s. Yeah, he's like 23, 24. He's the one who's like, yep, I'm shouldering on with dad to take the family responsibility and work and earn. He's like, you pursue your dreams. And that lifted all the burden off my shoulders, essentially.
Wow. We're going to talk about this and lots more next week. We're going to see you again, same time, same place. ਦੇਖਣਾ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲਣਾ, ਆਪਾਂ ਰੂਬੀ ਡਾਲ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਰਨੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਸੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲਣਾ ਸ਼ੋ ਹਰ ਸੋਮਵਾਰ ਸ਼ਾਮੀ 6:30 ਵਜੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਚੈਨਲ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ. Ruby, I hope you'll allow us back into your home next week so that we can talk some more. ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ.